Chapter 375. That day, too. I am the one who will become your master. Ryu Sowol was dumbfounded by the man's arrogant words, spoken so casually. You're completely insane. No sooner had those words left her mouth. Phew. She couldn't hide her bewilderment at the incredibly vicious energy she felt right behind her. Even her father, Master Ryu Gang of the Moon Vein, one of the greatest masters she knew, had never exuded such an overwhelming pressure when revealing his aura. But this energy she felt from behind was like being in front of a ferocious beast. What kind of energy is this? This insolent female is so desperate to die. Whoosh. At that moment, the man dressed entirely in black extended his hand, gesturing not to interfere. With just the man's gesture, that tremendous energy disappeared instantly. At this, Ryu Sowol was inwardly amazed. What on earth was the identity of this man who could command such a monstrous being whose level she couldn't even fathom? As she was wondering about this, clang, her sword, caught between the man's two fingers, broke in half. Ah! He hadn't even used any true energy. He had simply gripped the blade with his bare hand strength, and not only that but shattered it. As she was in shock, the man who had suddenly approached, grabbed the front of her clothes. Then, rip. He tore her clothes right off. In an instant her upper garment was torn away, exposing her pert breasts. Flustered, Ryu Sowol instinctively covered her chest with both arms. Seeing her like this, the man smirked and said, "You're no different from other females. Even in a life-threatening situation you're embarrassed about merely exposing your chest." At these words, Ryu Sowol's expression, which had been overcome with shame, suddenly hardened. She had thought he might be trying to violate her, but the man's expression remained unchanged. Rather, he seemed to be mocking her reaction. Ordinary women, even if they were martial artists, would be at a loss from shame and embarrassment in this situation. However, she had grown up like a man since her brother's death. Therefore she was different from those other women. Ryu Sowol felt defiant, but hiding this she instead showed a more timid appearance, clutching her chest even tighter. "You don't come any closer." Seeing her like this, the man shook his head and was about to let go of the torn cloth as if he had lost interest when, pat. At that moment, Ryu Sowol suddenly thrust the broken sword blade towards the center of the man's neck. But, damn it! Her blade didn't reach the center of the man's neck. This was because a chilling yet vast energy was holding her entire body. It was similar to manipulating true energy, yet completely different. Because the energy was so evil. Flinch. Flinch. She trembled, overcome with fear enough to make her whole body break out in goosebumps. It was the first time in her life she had encountered an opponent so terrifying and frightening just from their energy. The man approached her like this and gently lifted her chin, saying, "I thought you were embarrassed, but you were waiting for an opportunity? Interesting. Isn't it? She's nothing but an insect. Isn't she more interesting than those docile women of our clan? That's because..." Enough. The man cut off the words of the one behind him and smiled at Ryu Sowol, saying, "What, have you suddenly become afraid? Are you going to kill me? You recklessly aimed for the life of one who will become your master, so you must pay a corresponding price. However, if you beg for your life, realizing your proper place, I might consider it." "What? I am not one without mercy. Kill me." For a moment, a strange light flashed in the man's eyes at her words. "Kill you? As someone born a martial artist, I'm always prepared to die. No matter how scared I am, I won't beg for my life from anyone. So kill me." Who? One of the man's eyebrows raised. He had just been enjoying a moment of amusement with an insignificant being. But this female, no, this woman. Was she a being with her own sense of honor and dignity? The man, showing interest, eventually spoke. "Interesting. A mere woman possessing the honor of a warrior." "Warrior. Yes. Warrior. I don't dislike such people. And I respect the honor of a warrior. But, as a warrior, I apologize for insulting you. In that sense, I'll give you a clean death. If you have any last words, speak them." The man said as he removed his hand from Ryu Sowol's chin. To this, she, having already abandoned attachment to her life, answered in a voice drained of strength. "I don't. What last words could I have when I'm about to die? Leaving such things would only make me want to live." At her answer, the corners of the man's mouth turned up. Usually when asked if they have any last words, people tend to leave expected messages. Most are expressions of regret, farewells to those left behind, or requests for their treatment. But to cut off her own lingering attachments to life like this. Truly a person of dignity. It had just been amusement, and a moment ago it was respect, but now he was genuinely interested. Among the women of his clan, none had shown such true dignity in front of him. So the man asked, "Not bad. What? I'll change my question. Instead of last words, tell me what you desire." "What's the difference?" "I'm saying I'll grant whatever you wish for as your last request." The man's intention in these words was clear. Having taken a liking to Ryu Sowol, he changed the question to give her a chance to save her life. There was a difference between last words and a desire. If she wished to preserve her life, he would spare her. No, wouldn't she naturally say that? But her answer was completely different from what he expected. "I want to become strong." "You want to become strong?" For a moment, Ryu Sowol was inwardly perplexed at her own words. She didn't know why, but the atmosphere seemed to have reversed due to some whim of her opponent. But in that instant when she was wondering what she truly desired, she had unconsciously blurted out those words. It seemed too late to take them back when, "Ha!" Suddenly, the man burst into uproarious laughter as if something was extremely amusing. At this sight, she wore a bewildered expression. Late at night, Ryu Gang, the head of the Moon Vein, was left speechless at the sight of junior head Ryu Sowol. This was because her face was covered in bruises and wounds, and she was limping as if severely injured. He had felt sorry for his words and actions earlier in the day, but his belief that she needed to be raised strongly as the junior head remained unchanged, so he had intended to scold her. However, seeing her in this state, he simply couldn't bring himself to be angry about it. Rather, what on earth happened? Why are you in such a state? No matter how strongly he had raised her, what father wouldn't worry and just let it pass when seeing his child in such a miserable condition? To his question, Ryu Sowol couldn't bring herself to give any answer. Strength is not something you simply obtain. A warrior becomes strong through fighting. Those were the words that man had said. After that, she had fought like mad with the man who claimed to be his subordinate. For almost several hours without rest. It was the first time. The first time she had thought she wanted to die because it was so painful. Can you not hear this master's words? At Master Ryu Gang's pressing, she couldn't bring herself to open her mouth. In truth, she wanted to tell everything she had experienced. But she had made a promise with that man. "I'll only say 2 things. Don't reveal to anyone that you met me. And if you come to this place around the same time every year, you can obtain the strength you desire." She had her own stubbornness. A stubbornness to unconditionally keep a promise once made. That's why she finally kept her mouth shut despite her father's continued pressing. Master Ryu Gang finally gave up. "You stubborn child." Clicking his tongue at her obstinacy, Master Ryu Gang spoke to her as if making an announcement. "The Heaven Vein has proposed a marriage." "What? A marriage? What was he talking about?" To her bewildered look, Master Ryu Gang exhaled a deep sigh and said, "It seems the Heaven Vein's junior head wants you." "I don't." Ryu Sowol raised her voice, flaring up. At this, Master Ryu Gang snorted. "Humph. You wouldn't answer when I asked about your well-being, but now you open your mouth when marriage is discussed." "That's... I refused for now." At those words, she let out a sigh of relief. However, the words that followed were by no means something to be relieved about. "But I accepted their proposal." "What? What proposal?" "I said I would allow the marriage if the Heaven Vein's junior head becomes the leader at the unification ceremony." "Master, no, father." Ryu Sowol, who had been kneeling, suddenly stood up and shouted. Master Ryu Gang also raised his voice. "Be quiet. This is all for the sake of our family." "For the sake of the family? You said I was no longer a woman because I'm the junior head of the Moon Vein. So why should I marry the Heaven Vein's junior head? Didn't I say? It's all for the Moon Vein." "That's not an answer. If you marry the person who will become the leader, the Heaven Vein and Moon Vein will become closely tied. And the Heaven Vein has agreed to give your firstborn son to the Moon Vein." At these words from Master Ryu Gang, Ryu Sowol's expression turned cold. Her father had already reached an agreement with the head of the Heaven Vein. Through this agreement, she realized, The fact that her father had accepted such a proposal meant that he didn't have high expectations for her as junior head. Plunge. Ryu Sowol's fists tightened. It wasn't that she didn't understand her father. Master Ryu Gang had become unable to produce seed due to a past injury. That's why he desperately wanted someone to continue the Moon Vein's lineage, and she didn't meet that requirement. But, you are now the junior head. Were those words her brother had spoken, tightly grasping her hand as he breathed his last from illness, merely empty words? Was all her effort to fill his empty place for nothing? It truly made her heart ache. But besides this heartache, she also felt defiant. Grind. Ryu Sowol gritted her teeth. Yes. If she thought about it the other way around, the answer was there. The solution to overturn all of this. It was none other than Prek. Bai Yonghian, the junior head of the Heaven Vein, stared at the broken wooden sword with wildly shaking eyes. This was because he was inwardly amazed at the skills of Ryu Sowol, the Moon Vein's junior head, which changed every year. Until just 4 years ago he still had to hide his true skills. But at some point the situation changed. From 3 years ago her skills began to improve dramatically, and 2 years ago he could no longer hide his strength. And last year she had finally caught up to within half a move. He was able to avoid a draw by using the Heaven Vein's secret technique, but it had reached a point where he could no longer be careless. So he had diligently practiced martial arts for a year to widen the gap again. But an unbelievable thing happened. How can this be? She had broken his wooden sword in just about 20 moves. He had thought he had closed the gap that had opened because he had reached the peak of the transcendent realm and widened the difference again. But how could this happen? Grind. Bai Yonghian ground his teeth in frustration. There was only one reason he had tried to maintain that difference and win at all costs. Don't act weak and become the leader. Then you'll be able to take that child as your wife. It was because of his promise with his father. But not only had she caught up in 8 years, Ryu Sowol's martial prowess had finally surpassed his own. From the moment the wooden sword broke, the gap was already clearly evident, but if he fell here it felt like he would lose her forever. So, Bai Yonghian was determined not to give up even if it meant fighting bare-handed. However, woong. The moment he saw the blue sword energy gathering in her bare hands, he lost all will to fight. This is impossible. To transcend the barrier at the mere age of 28. That meant she had reached the transformation realm, Wajayong. Murmur. At this amazing sight there was a commotion and uproar everywhere. Even Master Ryu Gang of the Moon Vein was so shocked that he forgot his composure and stood up abruptly from his seat. Chapter 376. That day 3. Wah. At last the entire training ground resounded with the cheers of the Moon Vein members. Amid their shouts, Ryu Sowol withdrew the sword energy she had raised with her sword technique and looked towards the west. There she saw the joyful retainers and warriors of Moon Vein, and her father, Master Ryu Gang, standing up from his seat, dumbfounded. She looked at her father and lightly tapped her chest with her fist. Thump. At her gesture, which seemed to prove herself, Master Ryu Gang's lips twitched and soon his eyes reddened. As he raised his head towards the sky and closed his eyes, a single tear rolled down his cheek. Seeing her father like this, Ryu Sowol barely managed to contain her intense emotions. She had been incredibly curious about how he would react when she defeated the junior head of Heaven Vein and surpassed the limits he had set. Would he feel relieved? Or would his long-held resentment be resolved? But now, seeing her father's emotional reaction, she felt a sudden lump in her throat. After giving up everything and accepting that kind of proposal, why are you crying now? This wouldn't resolve the bitterness of all those years. Emotions were truly spiteful. Just one look at that face and her heart was inexplicably softening. Amidst the cheers, a faint voice was heard. This can't be. How? It was the muttering of Bai Yonghian, the junior head of Heaven Vein. After surpassing the wall and reaching the transformation realm, all her senses had become more acute than before, and she could hear this voice clearly. Yonghian. His usual playful and confident demeanor had completely vanished, and he seemed overwhelmed by the shock of defeat. Although she had endured hardships to defeat him, seeing him like this inevitably made her feel sympathetic. She was about to say something to him when, step, she saw Bai Hyongmyong, the clan leader of Heaven Vein, approaching behind him. Was he coming to console his son who was shocked by the defeat? Seeing him place his hand on his son's shoulder, she thought it would be better for them to comfort him rather than the victor of the duel, so she stepped back. But then, for a moment she doubted her eyes. Smee Ling. The corners of Bai Hyung-myong's mouth, who had his hand on his son's shoulder, were turned upwards. It wasn't the kind of benevolent smile a father would give to console his son who had experienced his first defeat. It looked as if he was smiling as though he had been waiting for this. Seeing this, Ryu Sowol was suddenly gripped by a sense of displeasure. Why is he? However, junior head. Due to the Moon Vane members rushing over to congratulate her on her first victory in the duel, she had to bury this feeling of displeasure. The lingering unpleasantness soon became buried in the joy of the clan members. That day, as the sun was setting, Ryu Sowol, who had climbed to the peak of the mountain with light steps, spotted someone and smiled brightly. Then she ran and embraced that person. That someone was a man dressed entirely in black. The man also enveloped her in his arms as she came into his embrace and said with a smile, "It seems you've finally achieved what you've been longing for. Bev. And who do you think taught me? Seeing you even resort to flattery, you must be in a very good mood, aren't you? Of course. The years of endurance are bitter, but the fruit is sweet." Swish. With those words, Ryu Sowol held the man's cheeks with both hands, stood on her tiptoes and kissed his lips. The man responded by continuing with a deep kiss. He was her master who had awakened her as a warrior, and the first man who made her realize she was a woman. Although they only met for 2 or 3 days a year at most, at some point she had come to hold this man in her heart. And it didn't take long for her to realize that she wasn't the only one with such feelings. For a while the man and Sowol indulged in each other under the red sunset. Sitting on the edge of the cliff, leaning on the man's shoulder, Ryu Sowol's face was full of smiles. There had never been a time in her life when things were this smooth and happy. The man spoke to her. "Now that you've achieved what you wanted, are you closer to your goal of becoming the society leader?" "I don't know yet. I won this time, but I don't know how things might change next year." You've grown quite a bit. You told me to never let my guard down. Satisfaction leads to complacency, and complacency ultimately leads to defeat. That's why it's meaningless to savor victory for too long." "That's true. But when I hear you talk, it sounds like you've been fighting non-stop your entire life." The man silently smiled at her words. His expression seemed to be an affirmation. "Really? I've been living on battlefields since long before you can imagine. Even now, you say?" Ryu Sowol lifted her head from the shoulder she was leaning on and looked at the man. Although she had come to like him, there was still so much she didn't know. Looking at his exotic appearance, it was unclear whether he was from the Central Plains or not. Yet he didn't seem to be from the western regions either. It was a feeling that was hard to describe in words. "Whenever I look at you, I can't help but think how mysterious you are." "What do you mean?" "Your appearance, everything. You wait here every year without fail, but I don't know where you come from or where you go." She had met with him here every year, but she had never seen him climb up or down this place. Nevertheless, he always appeared in the same spot. This had always been a mystery to her. But even though they had become this close, the man never talked about anything regarding himself. Sometimes this made her feel a bit sad. As if understanding her feelings, the man wrapped his arm around her shoulder and spoke in a gentle voice. "I'll tell you someday. But now is not the time." "When will that be?" "Not too far from now. The place where I live is becoming increasingly desolate, and war has been continuing for a long time. That's why I've been keeping an eye on this place for a long time. But if I do it now, they will move too. Then this place will soon become a battlefield." What kind of world does this man live in? When she listens to him talk, it sounds as if he's alone in a different world. But soon she put away such thoughts. Surely he would tell her everything when the time was right? That's what she firmly believed. Ryu Sowol tightly held the arm of the man wrapped around her shoulder and said playfully, "Ah, I see. But I seem to remember someone saying something about becoming the lord of this place a few years ago. Maybe I'm remembering wrong?" "Lord. Yes, I had intended to." "Oh my. Is that so? You should be grateful for this. There are still many who wish for that. Even the one who has been dealing with you for the past few years." He's referring to his subordinate who, under the guise of teaching, had beaten her black and blue for years. That person hadn't changed even after years had passed. He always treated her like an insignificant bug. Although she had grown up like a tomboy, she had been called a peerless beauty countless times. He was probably the only one who treated her like that. By the way, how is that person doing? Didn't I tell you? For our clan, everyday life itself is a battlefield. Battlefield. It seems even more desolate than my life. Everyone's life is precious. It's just that we often fail to realize it easily. Is that true for me too? Of course. Ryu Sowol smiled at his answer. He had become much gentler than when they first met, but he was still as blunt as ever. However, she could feel that he respected and cherished her more than anyone else. That's why she liked him so much. Staring intently at the man, Ryu Sowol spoke in a slightly hushed voice. I wish you could stay by my side. As her feelings for him had deepened, she always found the short annual meetings unsatisfying. Finding her cute as she expressed her desire to be together while feeling shy about it, the man stroked her head and said, just a little. No, it might not be just a little for you, but wait for me. If I wait, can we be together forever? Yes. We will be together. Even if it's just for a fleeting moment. A fleeting moment. Why did he say a fleeting moment instead of forever when talking about being together? To her puzzled look, the man spoke in a somewhat regretful tone. If only you were like me. What do you mean by that? It pains me to embrace you knowing it's just a fleeting moment. Why are you talking like that? Ryu Sowol suddenly felt uneasy at his incomprehensible words. The man then hugged her tightly and said, don't worry. Even if it's fleeting, my feelings for you will continue. Is it because our life together feels short to you? Yes. Ryu Sowol chuckled at his words. Her uneasiness vanished without a trace. If he felt that the remaining life was short when they still had a long way to go, she could tell how much this man liked her. She hugged him tightly back and said, someone once told me that it shines brighter because it's short. We can live like that too, can't we? It shines brighter because it's short. Yes, that's right. The man smiled. And as he kissed her forehead, he said, this moment with you is indeed the brightest in my life. As he was speaking, he suddenly turned his head slightly to the side. I thought I told them not to disturb me while I'm here. I apologize. The situation was too urgent, I had no choice. Hearing a familiar voice, Ryu Sowol looked in that direction and saw that the man's subordinate had already arrived. Feeling embarrassed, she quickly stood up, suddenly feeling awkward about being in the man's arms. Oh, it's been a while. Sir Tao. Despite her greeting, the man's subordinate called Tao merely glanced at her as if looking at a bug and ignored her. Then he approached the man and whispered something in his ear. I can't hear. She tried to focus her auditory senses to hear what they were saying, but their conversation was inaudible. It seemed they had blocked it with some kind of energy. However, the man's expression as he listened to his report was not good at all. When the report was over, the man approached her and said in a somewhat subdued voice, it seems I have to leave. It looks like a difficult situation. Is there anything I can do to help? It's all right. You have things to do here, don't you? Still. Before she could finish speaking, the man gently embraced her and said, don't worry. I'll come back here as I always have. I understand. Yes. The man is not weak enough for her to worry about. She believed that no one could defeat him because he was stronger than anyone she knew. I'll be waiting. She sent him off with a bright smile, looking forward to next year. However, at this moment she had no doubt that this expectation would be shattered. Ryu Sowol lay on her bed, covered with a blanket, shedding endless tears. She had waited for the man in that place for nearly 7 days in the rain, but he never appeared. She was so worried that she had almost completely stopped eating and drinking. She was in agony, feeling as if that small bit of uneasiness she had felt had become reality, despite how much she had believed in him. Sob. The tears wouldn't stop. Her heart ached unbearably, wondering if he who had always said he lived in the midst of battle had left this world without her. As she continued to cry, unable to stop her tears of sorrow and pain, someone knocked on her door. Knock knock. Go. Please just leave me. Bang. At that moment the door opened and someone entered. It was her father, Ryu Gang, the clan leader of Moon Vane. Ryu Gang looked at her, who had grown thin with sorrow, and spoke in a sympathetic voice. How long do you intend to stay like this? Just leave me alone. I won in this duel too, didn't I? So, Is it because you couldn't meet him? Her expression suddenly hardened. She then glared at Hua Yun, the head of the guard who was standing behind Master Ryu Gang. She had only told Hua Yun, her longtime confidant, about him. She had asked her to keep it absolutely secret, but had she told him? But then Master Ryu Gang clicked his tongue and said, "If you like him that much, don't you trust him?" What? What is he talking about? She was dumbfounded. She had thought that when he found out about this he would fly into a rage, seeing her only as the clan's heir and junior head. This was because he had hoped for her to form a relationship with one of the junior heads of Heaven Vein or Earth Vein and bear children, even though she had defeated them. So when her father, who she thought would react like that, said these words, she couldn't help but be surprised. Did you think this father, no, the leader of our clan, would unconditionally oppose it? Along with these words, Master Ryu Gang snorted with a bitter expression and said, "I'm quite curious to see the face of that bastard who made my daughter cry like this." Father. Tears welled up in Ryu Sowol's eyes again. Her father had been so strict and cold ever since she became the junior head. But for the first time since her brother left, he was treating her as his daughter. Overwhelmed, she burst into tears as her father Ryu Gang approached and embraced her. Ryu Sowol, who had been silently crying out of worry and longing for him, wept loudly with a tearful face. Her father Ryu Gang silently patted her back and comforted her. After she had cried for a while, Ryu Gang said to her, "When that bastard returns, I'll give him a good thrashing, so cheer up now." "That's enough now. If you miss him that much, tell the painter to draw a portrait and hang it up." "What? I should know what my future son-in-law looks like too, shouldn't I?" Father. While you're at it, why don't you dress up prettily and have a portrait drawn of yourself too? In the future, when you lead Moon Vein, no, the Heaven Earth Moon Society in my place, you'll rarely have the chance to dress up as a woman. Are you finally seeing me as your daughter now? At her words, Ryu Gang smiled with his wrinkled face and said, "You've always been my daughter, even before you were the junior head." More than any other words, her father's statement was the greatest comfort in her life. 6 months later. On the way back from visiting the Spiritual Sword Sanctuary in Joyong, northern Hubei province, Hua Yun, the head guard of Ryu Sowol, kept teasing her. The clan leader must have been so furious to send an express message. "Why did you wear a bridal gown for your portrait when you haven't even held the wedding yet?" "It was to leave a portrait in the most beautiful appearance. Is that really something to get so worked up about?" "Of course it is. You had your portrait painted in a bridal gown and he had his painted like a groom. How could he not be upset?" At Hua Yun's words, Ryu Sowol pouted and expressed her dissatisfaction. He was all talk about son-in-law this and that, but it was all empty words. "Still, you went too far, junior head. Stop teasing me now. It's giving me a headache." Seeing her reaction, Hua Yun seemed to think it was time to stop teasing, and changed the subject awkwardly. "By the way, it's quite a coincidence, isn't it?" "What is?" "The time when the sword will be completed coincides with when you can ascend as the society leader." At her words, Ryu Sowol waved her hand and said, "Don't get too excited. We don't know anything for sure yet." But why did you show such confidence in front of the master of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary as if you would become the society leader? Should I have said I wasn't confident in front of an outsider? Well, I suppose that's true. Hua Yun nodded. The master she served had truly become the greatest expert among the 3 branches. She had every right to be proud. Hua Yun herself was also very proud to serve such a young lady. By the way, junior head, did you name the sword that way because of him? Hua Yun had unintentionally overheard the conversation between Ryu Sowol and Master O Moon Hyok of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary. When he asked about the name of the sword, Ryu Sowol had asked him to call it Sunyan. Sunyan means longing. It means longing to the point of aching. If she's giving such a name to the precious sword she'll use for life, it's clear how much the junior head must miss him. But Ryu Sowol answered in a subdued voice. "Let's talk about that later. I'm sorry, young lady. This darned mouth of mine ran off without me realizing." Hua Yun made a gesture of slapping her own mouth with her palm. Seeing her like that, Ryu Sowol chuckled. Then she soon said, "Right now, I just want to focus on the duel at the unification ceremony." Junior head. At her firm resolve, Hua Yun's lips twitched, unable to hide her inner pride. After going through many hardships, she had truly become strong. She was becoming someone capable of leading many people. You will definitely win. You'll become the final victor at the unification ceremony of the three veins, ascend as the society leader, and obtain the 8 thought-shattering techniques, known as the ultimate secret technique. 8 thought-shattering techniques. It was the catalyst that had caused the three veins of Heaven Earth Moon Society to split into 3 factions. Chapter 377. That Day 4. The origin of the three veins of Heaven Earth Moon Society can be traced back to the fall of the Old Murim. After the day of the Great Calamity, hundreds of martial arts sects were wiped out, and countless martial artists perished, their numbers beyond count. However, those who barely survived that day became the roots of the current martial arts world. Originally, Heaven Vein, Earth Vein, and Moon Vein were derived from one source. Yang Biryu, the keeper of martial records. He was a man of outstanding martial prowess who managed the hidden martial records, considered the most important in a group that pursued pure martial arts. He was able to become the keeper of martial records not only because of his martial skills but also because he had been castrated, unable to have children, and had lost his sight, unable to see. As the hidden keeper of martial records for the martial arts group he belonged to, he lived and ate in a deep underground chamber, only coming out once every 6 days for a single day of rest. He essentially lived there, didn't he? That's right. Yang Biryu, who guarded the martial records, went out for his day of rest as usual, but he had to face a shocking reality. The massive martial arts library, the manor, and even the city that should have been above were all gone. Being blind, the only sense he could detect were the heavy smell of blood, a pungent odor he had never encountered before, and the smell of burnt ashes. Shocked beyond measure, he wandered for 3 days and nights looking for survivors, but eventually realized he was the only one left and departed from that place. Although he had become unable to have children, he had sworn loyalty to this massive organization that had taken him in despite being born blind. The reality was too shocking, but he couldn't stay in a place where no one else remained. As he left the ruins, after much deliberation, he decided to take one secret martial arts manual that he had been guarding. Unable to let this sole remnant and important secret manual of the organization be lost, he wandered the world with the mission of handing it over if he ever found a survivor. However, even after 10 years, no survivors appeared. While searching for survivors, he happened to find 3 orphans on the brink of starvation in a poor village, and after saving them, he took them under his wing. Don't tell me they are? Yes. They are the 3 founders of Heaven Earth Moon Society's branches. Coming from a poor village, they had no family names, only given names. Yang Biryu, who took them in, raised them like his own children out of loneliness, and even taught them his unique martial arts so they could protect themselves. Despite teaching them martial arts, Yang Biryu, unable to reveal his origins, did not tell them the name of the martial art. Even after taking in these children, he continued to wander for a long time. Unable to find any survivors, he eventually passed away from old age and illness in a small village. As he died suddenly without leaving any last words, the 3 siblings he had taken in were left with many worries. Yang Biryu, who had many secrets, didn't tell them much, so they didn't even know who he was looking for. After deliberation, they decided to burn it. They had never dared to touch what their adoptive father had called unthinkable, so they tried to destroy it out of respect for his wishes. However, their agreement did not go as planned. Was it greed after all? For those who had learned martial arts, it was nothing short of the ultimate treasure. Only after Yang Biryu's death did they first see its contents, and they simply couldn't overcome their desire. So that's how they split up? That's right. Taking one character each from their adoptive father Yang Biryu's name for their surnames, they became the founders of Heaven Vein, Earth Vein, and Moon Vein, and for a long time, they were in conflict over possessing the secret manual. As they continued to oppose each other for a long time and their scale grew, they also began to face external enemies. Because of this, in later generations, they judged that it was meaningless for the 3 branches with the same roots to keep fighting, and they made a treaty. That was the duel at the unification ceremony. They agreed to reunite the 3 divided branches into one association, and the one who leads this association would possess this secret manual. That secret manual was the 8 thought-shattering techniques. And so, the day of the final duel to determine the society leader quickly approached. The location for the duel was the training ground of Moon Vein. For Master Ryu Gang, this day held a special significance. Just 8 years ago he had lost all motivation, believing that Heaven Vane would take everything. But now, everyone saw Moon Vane's junior head as the likely society leader. My dear Hun, our Sowol has grown so much. It's been over 10 years since they passed away, so why do I miss them so much now? With this thought he went to the separate building where their memorial tablets were placed. As he entered the building he stopped abruptly in surprise. The reason was that someone was inside the separate building. It was Bai Yonghian, the junior head of Heaven Vane. He had thought he would be preparing for tomorrow's final duel, so why was he here? As he wondered, he saw Bai Yonghian staring intently at something and gritting his teeth. Grind. Then Bai Yonghian came out and met him face to face. Master. What brings you here? I came to pay my respects to Brother Hun. Ah, I see. The junior head before Ryu Sowol was Ryu Hun. That's why Bai Yonghian, who had competed with him several times and built a friendship, was here. Knowing this, Master Ryu Gang nodded in understanding. But the place where the memorial tablets were located wasn't in that direction, so why had the junior head of Heaven Vane been looking in a different direction and getting angry? I'll be heading back to the guest quarters now. Very well. After sending him off, Master Ryu Gang entered and let out a faint sigh. What Bai Yonghian had been looking at was none other than the portraits of Ryu Sowol and the man she liked. He had hung their portraits to show them to his deceased wife and son. Seeing this must have been quite disheartening for him. Moreover, although it wasn't intentional in the portrait, Ryu Sowol was wearing a bridal gown, which must have made it even worse. This is unfortunate. He was well aware that Bai Yonghian, the junior head of Heaven Vane, liked Ryu Sowol as a woman. That's why the clan leader of Heaven Vane must have made such a proposal. But they are not destined for each other. Even if Bai Yonghian, the junior head of Heaven Vane, were to win the final duel, he would never win Sowol's heart. That's how firm her heart was. Bark. Ryu Sowol looked up at the sky and shouted as if roaring. All the members of Moon Vane on the western side cheered at her roar. And for good reason, as she had finally won the final duel. The final duel was incredibly intense. This was because Bai Yonghian, the junior head of Heaven Vane, had also managed to break through the wall in the past year, just like her. If she hadn't made painstaking efforts over the past year, she might have lost. However, after nearly 2 hours of fierce battle, she emerged victorious. I won. I really won. Ryu Sowol was overjoyed. Her preparation, based on the assumption that the junior head of Heaven Vane would become as strong as her, had paid off perfectly. Breaking through the wall was a realm of enlightenment, and many couldn't reach it even after decades of training, but she was certain that he would reach the same realm as her. Ha! Ha! After roaring and savoring her joy, she looked at Bai Yonghian, the junior head of Heaven Vane, who was sitting on the ground. He must be deeply disappointed. This duel was different from the previous ones. It was the occasion to determine the leader of the 3 branches and the owner of the 8 thought-shattering techniques, the ultimate secret manual. And it was your last chance to have me. But with this defeat, the proposal made by the clan leader of Heaven Vane became null and void. Ryu Sowol, who had been staring at Bai Yonghian, approached him. Although she didn't like him as a man and they had been fighting for their respective clans, he was also a longtime friend. There would be no more need to fight him, so it was time to embrace him. She extended her hand towards Bai Yonghian, the junior head of Heaven Vane, and said, "Take my hand." Tedder. At that moment, Ryu Sowol felt a chill down her spine. Bai Yonghian had raised his head and was glaring at her with murderous intent, tears in his eyes. Even if he was disheartened by his defeat, could he be this agitated? To the bewildered Ryu Sowol, Bai Yonghian opened his mouth. You have finally driven me to the edge. Yonghian, don't call me that. Smack. Bai Yonghian slapped away the hand she had extended. Then he stood up on his own, cupped his hands in salute and left the training ground. Watching his retreating figure, Ryu Sowol was gripped by an odd sense of foreboding. Why did his demeanor not feel like mere disappointment? 3 months had passed since then. During this time, the unification ceremony of the 3 branches had proceeded normally, and Ryu Sowol, who was about to have her inauguration ceremony as the society leader, wore an expressionless face. Hua Yun, the head of her guard, looked at her with sympathetic eyes. Sigh. Ryu Sowol was smoking a pipe, something she had never done before, burning tobacco leaves. The thick smoke surrounding her spoke of her depressed mood. After the final duel, she had hurried to meet her lover at their usual place, but she returned a few days later deeply heartbroken. It was because he hadn't shown up. Feeling as if she had been abandoned, she was immersed in sorrow and grief, secluding herself for nearly 8 days before finally coming out. Since then she had been constantly smoking her pipe with an emotionless face, staring intently at the 8 thought-shattering techniques and practicing it. Ah, young lady. The sight was utterly pitiful. She could only hope that she would overcome this. By the way, since the 8 thought-shattering techniques was said to be the ultimate secret manual, they naturally thought she would be practicing techniques or something similar, but she had been just reading it continuously. Although she wondered what could be written in it to make her act like this, she hoped that practicing martial arts would help her forget her sorrows, so she didn't ask about it at all. Besides, she didn't have the right to ask in the first place. But as it was late at night, nearly dawn, Hua Yun cautiously broached the subject. Junior head, no head. Tomorrow is the inauguration ceremony. Wouldn't it be better if you got some sleep? I'm worried you might fall ill from exhaustion. Don't worry about it and go to sleep. How can I, your guard, sleep before you? Then just leave me be. It's not like I'll die from lack of sleep. Her voice was ice cold. Was it her deep sorrow that had made her like this? Hua Yun could only watch her sadly until the late hours of dawn. Dressed in the formal attire and crown prepared for the inauguration ceremony, she looked into a mirror. The reflection in the mirror still looked unhappy. However, she tried to compose her expression. Although her longing had grown even stronger because he hadn't appeared this time either, this moment required her to focus as the society leader leading Moon Vane, no Heaven-Earth-Moon Society. The person who was to become the society leader couldn't be seen looking depressed and buried in emotions. Tap. Standing up from her seat, she spoke with a firm voice. Let's go. Yes, head. Hua Yun, the head of her guard, and the warriors assisting with her inauguration ceremony as the society leader followed behind her. As Ryu Sowol walked along the corridor towards the main hall, her steps felt incredibly heavy. She had been waiting for this day ever since she became the junior head. Although she was depressed because her lover hadn't appeared, she didn't think he would break his promise to her so easily. He would surely appear someday. Until then, she just needed to fulfill her duties as the society leader. Step. As she headed towards the main hall, her expression became subtle. When she paused her steps for a moment, Hua Yun asked curiously, "Young lady, what's wrong?" "Something strange. Pardon. No matter how solemnly it's being held, this is..." Feeling that something was off, Ryu Sowol stopped walking slowly and rushed into the main hall. At that moment, Ryu Sowol's expression hardened. The inside of the main hall was nothing short of a scene from hell. Countless corpses were piled up, and the grand decorations for the inauguration ceremony were all stained with blood. Teach this is. Hua Yun and the guards who followed her couldn't hide their shock. What on earth had happened here? How did they not know about this until now? Head. As Hua Yun called out to Ryu Sowol, they saw her staggering towards something. There. Fa. Father. The severed head of Moon Vane's master Ryu Gang lay on the floor with eyes wide open, and around it were the mutilated corpses of Moon Vane's retainers and warriors in a horrific state. Ryu Sowol, who had been staggering forward, collapsed to the floor in front of her father's severed head. Thud. Ugh. Choked up, she couldn't speak properly and embraced her father's head, pulling it close. They say that when human emotions become too intense, they cannot be controlled. Ryu Sowol held her father's head, unable to make a sound or even breathe properly. Why had her father ended up like this? What on earth had happened here? Then, you're here at last. A voice was heard. Looking in that direction, she saw a man slowly walking out from beside the throne. The man with a blood-soaked sword resting on his shoulder was none other than Bai Yonghian, the junior head of Heaven Vane, no, the one who was to become the clan leader of Heaven Vane. Her eyes, filled with a mix of sorrow and anger and barely able to breathe properly, didn't leave him. Then Bai Yonghian smiled and said, "How do you like it? Is the inauguration gift to your liking?" You. Is he calling this a gift? Bai Yonghian, have you truly gone mad? All sorts of words erupted inside her, but with her breathing still not calmed, she could only glare at him while exhaling rough breaths. Then Bai Yonghyun said something incomprehensible. You saw it, didn't you? I told you you'd be able to see the best face you've never seen before. Hey. How dare you? At that moment Hua Yun, the head guard, unable to contain her anger, launched herself towards Bai Yonghyun. No. Don't. A startled Ryu Sowol reached out her hand. But Hua Yun had already reached him and... Before she could even properly swing her sword, her body was split in half on the spot. Unable to even scream, her body fell to the floor in 2 pieces. Witnessing the death of Hua Yun, the head guard who had cared for her and been her companion since childhood, right before her eyes, Ryu Sowol's eyes turned red as if they were about to burst. Ugh. Bai Yonghyun, who had been smiling while watching her reaction, sat down on the society leader's throne. Then as he plunged his sword into the floor, he spoke with a cold face. Thud. You brought all of this upon yourself. Chapter 378. That day 5. You brought all of this upon yourself. Ugh. Ryu Sowol, her breathing ragged, glared murderously at Bai Yonghyun, the future clan leader of Heaven Vane, who was sitting on the society leader's throne. How could something like this happen? In her arms was the severed head of her father Ryu Gang, who had breathed his last, and around her were the bodies of Moon Vane people, chopped into pieces like hunks of meat. Such a horrific scene. And another tragedy unfolded before her eyes. Hua Yun. Her longtime companion had been cut in half and died. Her once clear and bright eyes were now bloodshot, and thick tears of blood flowed down her cheeks. Unable to even breathe due to the sorrow and anger overwhelming her, she continued to choke and cough, while Bai Yonghyun's face was full of smiles as he watched her. Protect the society leader. Rumble rumble. The guards protecting Ryu Sowol surrounded her with fear-filled eyes. Although they knew how monstrous the opponent was, having seen the supreme expert Hua Yun die from a single sword strike, they were still guards. They had to protect the society leader no matter what. Imyujin, Hua Yun's deputy, spoke to Ryu Sowol. Head, please come to your senses. Now is not the time to grieve. Ugh. Slowly regulate your breathing. You might fall into chi deviation from hyperventilation and mental shock. Despite her advice, Ryu Sowol couldn't easily regain her breath. She had already been in low spirits for nearly 3 months. In the midst of that, seeing all her loved ones meet such a tragic end before her eyes, it was impossible for the shock to subside easily. Then the sound of clapping was heard. Clap 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 clap. The one clapping was none other than Bai Yonghyun, the perpetrator of this tragedy. Bai Yonghyun looked at Ryu Sowol, who was choking and unable to control her breathing, and said, Your face is even better than I expected. Though he doesn't seem to like it. Imyujin frowned. There was no one visible around Bai Yonghyun. What was he talking about? As she wondered, Bai Yonghyun's face suddenly turned cold and he said, Stop blabbering. This is not for you to interfere with. What's going on? He felt something was odd. Strangely, every time he opened his mouth, his manner of speech changed, as if a different person was talking. As she found this peculiar. It's about time for you all to exit the stage. Bang. Bai Yonghyun, sitting on the throne, suddenly flicked his finger towards one of the guards. At that moment, thud. Gah. One guard's face was pierced, creating a hole. Clang. As another guard tried to catch the falling guard whose face had been pierced. Bang. The sound of something being flicked was heard again. With that, another guard's face was pierced through. As 2 guards died instantly from this incredible finger-flicking divine skill, the panicked guards tried to break their formation. At this, Deputy Imyujin shouted, We must maintain the formation. Bang. At that moment, Imyujin noticed something flying directly towards her. But it was already too late to dodge. She thought she would die with her face pierced, but... Smack. At that moment, someone pushed her and she narrowly avoided Bai Yonghyun's finger-flicking divine skill. The one who pushed her was none other than... It was Ryu Sowol, who until just now had been unable to breathe properly. Her breathing was still rough, but having somewhat caught her breath, she stood up with a ghastly face stained with tears of blood, and handed her father Ryu Gang's head, which she had been holding in her arms, to Imyujin. Guard it. I obey your command. Guard Deputy Imyujin received Ryu Gang's head. Then Ryu Sowol walked towards the throne, stepping on the blood-soaked floor of the main hall. Step, step. Her white formal attire was now stained red with blood. Watching Ryu So-woo approach, Bai Yonghyun, sitting on the throne, rested his chin on his hand and spoke with a hint of disappointment. "You're tougher than I thought. I didn't think you had the qualities of a leader." "Shut up." Shing. Ryu So-woo drew the sword from the scabbard at her waist. Although the custom-made sword by the Master of Spiritual Sword Sanctuary was not yet complete, this one given by her father was also a precious sword. Ryu So-woo, holding the drawn sword, looked only at Bai Yonghyun and said, "Go outside and summon the leaders of Earth Vane and the other sections." At the society leader Ryu So-woo's command, Im Yujin answered vigorously, "Yes." Although this tragic situation was heartbreaking, the only person who could stop and handle this was Ryu So-woo, the society leader of Heaven Earth Moon Society and the supreme expert. She had been worried about what would happen if So-woo couldn't regain her senses due to the severe shock, but this was somewhat relieving. However, will Earth Vane and the other sects respond to the summons? Most of the dead here seemed to be from Moon Vane and its related sects. This meant that the possibility of Earth Vane and other sects siding with or joining Heaven Vane couldn't be ruled out. Although it was troublesome, they had no choice. They had to call them come what may. But then, stop. As guard deputy Im Yujin and the guards were hurrying to leave the main hall, Ryu So-woo's voice rang out as if tearing through their ears. As they hurriedly tried to stop, someone appeared as if they had been waiting, swinging a sword imbued with powerful energy. The sword technique was extremely simple, but its power and range were tremendous, so, in an instant, it cut through the waists of guard deputy Im Yujin and the other guards, separating their upper bodies from their lower halves. Thud, 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 park. Ryu So-woo screamed at the sight. Once again her people had lost their lives right before her eyes. In the midst of this, Im Yujin, even as her body was cut in half, tried to lift up and protect the head of Moon Vane's Master Ryu Gang that she was holding. Thud. He had. I'm sorry. Im Yujin, who had prevented Master Ryu Gang's head from being damaged, breathed her last. At the same time, Ryu So-woo, who had been heading towards the throne, changed direction and launched herself towards the being who had cut them down. Clang. The sound of swords clashing resounded throughout the main hall, accompanied by a shockwave. Blue sparks flew in all directions as the two swords, both imbued with powerful energy, collided. Ryu So-woo shouted at her opponent before her eyes, her voice filled with anguish. Yang Incheol. The person before her eyes was the clan leader of Earth Vane. Earth Vane's Master Yang Incheol spoke with a somewhat bitter expression. "So it has come to this. No matter how much I try to accept it, we can't entrust the first position to lead an association to a mere woman like you. Just for such a reason. It's not just that. Did you think it would make sense for a woman like you to hold a position like the founder, who must lead these numerous sects, no matter how high your martial prowess? He joined them because he couldn't accept a woman? Just for such a reason?" Ryu So-woo's gaze turned cold. Then, whoosh. As her energy rose, Earth Vane's Master Yang Incheol's body began to be pushed back. He had reached the pinnacle stage of the transcendent realm and had devoted himself to internal energy cultivation for much longer than her, so he had been confident that he wouldn't be inferior in terms of energy at least. However, the gap between someone who had broken through the wall and a supreme expert was stark. By Yonghyun hell. Before his words could finish, Ryu So-woo's sword severed Master Yang Incheol's neck. Without even uttering a final cry, Yang Incheol's head rolled on the floor. Splurt. The blood spurting from his severed neck soaked her face. Regardless, Ryu So-woo stomped on Yang Incheol's head. Crunch. Then with ragged breathing she turned her head and glared at Bai Yonghyun on the throne. Now she wasn't even curious about what kind of feelings had driven him to do this. She only wanted to tear him limb from limb and kill him. Swoosh. Ryu So-woo stomped on the floor and launched herself towards the throne. "If you wanted to shake me and make me fall into chi deviation so you could sit on the throne, I'll call it a mistake. Even if I can't overcome the shock and fall into chi deviation, I'll definitely kill you before that happens. At least you." Clang. At that moment her body was flung backwards. She flew back more than 5 zhang before stopping by plunging her sword into the floor. Crack. She looked at Bai Yonghian with surprised eyes. Bai Yonghian, still sitting on the throne, had somehow drawn the sword he had plunged into the floor earlier. He blocked my sword strike in that state. Although she had been consumed by extreme anger and had only thought about killing him unconditionally, this single contact was enough to calm her excitement. How did his energy become like this? His energy had changed from just 3 months ago. It had become so strong that it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say it had almost doubled, which left her puzzled. What on earth did he do? As she wondered, Bai Yonghian opened his mouth. Why are you surprised? What have you done? She questioned, confused by the energy that had changed so dramatically in just 3 months. Bai Yonghian answered in a monotone voice. I told you. You brought all of this upon yourself. Cut the crap. No matter how much you cultivate for your energy to increase this much in just 3 months. Flink. Her words were suddenly cut off. This was because of the ornament attached to Bai Yonghian's sword hilt. It was the ornament with intricate patterns that he had taken from her in a bet long ago. Why on earth was he wearing that on his sword hilt? Could it be? This? It seems he wants to talk directly. What are you talking about? At that moment, Bai Yonghian's smiling face suddenly turned cold as he spoke. Why did you do it? What are you talking about? Did you do it to shake me? Shake you? What do you mean? I only looked at you alone. But why? Did you do that? Did you humiliate me? Humiliate? Bai Yonghian, you? That man. That Maon. At that moment, Bai Yonghian sprang up from the throne, veins popping on his neck and forehead as he shouted. Seeing his crazed appearance, Ryu Sowol's face contorted, forgetting even her anger. Why had he changed like this? Was this really the same cheerful and playful man she knew? Why have you become like this? You still won't answer my question. Am I not even in your consideration? It's not about consideration. Is it the man you chose? What? You? Now. Don't tell me. It was beautiful. I wanted that beautiful sight to be by my side so much, but why such a... Hugh. Seeing Bai Yonghian trying to control his breathing out of anger, Ryu Sowol bit her lip hard. She had been wondering why he was acting like this. But to say that this tragedy was just because he couldn't have her? Is that why you took away everything I held dear? Just because you couldn't have me, you took from me? You are mine. Ryu Sowol. Rumble. With that shout, an enormous pressure arose, shaking the entire main hall as if an earthquake had struck. Shudder. For a moment she felt a chill down her spine. She even felt fear at his appearance, consumed by madness. She knew how addictive and painful this emotion could be, having loved a man herself and still longing for him. But his current state was closer to obsession than love. Then, swish. As Bai Yonghian pulled his hand towards somewhere, something flew and landed in his hand. It was none other than... You. Ryu Sowol's eyes shook violently. What had landed in his hand was the head of Heaven Vein's master Bai Hyongmong, with a round wound on the forehead and a severed neck. Seeing this, she was shocked beyond measure. The moment she saw the severed head, she was reminded of her father Ryu Gang and felt nauseous. Ugh. To her who was suffering, Bai Yonghian spoke with a crazed smile. How could I let you experience the pain alone? Although he was nothing but an empty shell, it was so painful when I beheaded my father with my own hands. You're insane. This man is truly mad. At first she thought his obsession had gone too far because he liked her too much. No, she thought that was the cause. But seeing him behead his own father to experience the same pain as her, she could only think that he had gone beyond madness and become truly insane. You just need to die. She gripped her sword hilt tightly with both hands and gritted her teeth. Any trace of sympathy had disappeared. If he had gone this mad and was consumed by insanity, the only answer was to kill him somehow. To her, Bai Yonghian dropped his father's head to the floor and reached out his hand as if inviting her, saying, Let's be together. We're the same now, we can understand each other. Stop spouting nonsense. I will never understand you. Please don't make me make that choice. Shut up. Swoosh. She hated even exchanging words with him anymore, so she raised all her energy and launched herself. However, given the sudden increase in his energy, the outcome of the battle might have already been decided. Ha. Unlike her battered state, Bai Yonghyun was still at ease. He was even sitting on the throne in the main hall, looking at her with arrogant eyes. Thud. Ryu Sowol plunged her sword into the floor like a cane and shouted while panting. Why? Arg. She wanted to kill him so badly but she couldn't. That tormented her terribly. She wanted to kill him but he was just toying with her. Then Bai Yonghyun, sitting on the throne, said, "This is your last chance. Let's be together." Ryu Sowol answered his proposal with a single word. Die. Then Sowol gripped her sword hilt tightly. She tore her clothes and wrapped them tightly around her wrist, then launched herself towards Bai Yonghyun sitting on the throne. But at that very moment, thud, in the blink of an eye, Bai Yonghyun, who had been on the throne, appeared in front of her and plunged his hand into her chest. Gah! Her bloodshot pupils shook. In those shaking pupils, countless beings flashed by. Her mother who died long ago, her brother Ryu Hun and her father Ryu Gang. And the faces of the Moonvein people. Lastly, the face of a single person appeared. It was that man. She had wanted to see him so much. She missed him so much. Crack. Something appeared in her eyes, which were being consumed by sorrow rather than death. It was her heart beating loudly. Who would have thought she'd see this while alive? To her who couldn't speak, Bai Yonghyun said with tears in his eyes and veins popping on his face, "The one you should hold in this heart is me." Ha. 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 Don't worry. One way or another we'll be together forever, Sowol. Crunch. As soon as those words ended, she saw the sight of her heart being crushed by his hand. The heart that had been beating as if still alive no longer beat. Is this how I die? Boom. At that moment, with a tremendous roar, the ceiling of the main hall collapsed. Everywhere suddenly darkened and filled with dust, obscuring vision, and she closed her eyes as she fell forward. Thud. Is this how I die? Then she heard someone scream that sounded like Bai Yonghyun's voice. Barg. After several screams, someone embraced her. She opened her eyes with difficulty. It was truly strange. Her heart had been ripped out, so she was as good as dead, but was this the final burst of consciousness before death? The person she had longed to see appeared. It was the man. Ugh. She saw him. She saw him looking at her with such sorrowful eyes, sobbing. Is he grieving my death? She wanted to say something but no voice came out. I wanted to be your bride. Sowol moved her lips with difficulty, and she wiped the tears flowing down his cheeks with her fingertips. She wanted to comfort him in his sorrow, even if it was for the last time. The man held her hand tightly and said, "You were beautiful. So beautiful, like a red peony in bloom." Puff. He saw it. Then she could no longer resist her heavy eyelids. As her eyes slowly closed, she saw him roaring in sorrow.